Well, the redoubtable and always prepared Jim Marrs is with us today to talk about something that came and went in the news all too quickly a couple of weeks ago. On November the 8th, a CBS News helicopter from Los Angeles videotaped a contrail that immediately became world famous because it appeared to be the contrail of a missile rising up about 35 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. Extraordinarily dangerous event, to say the least, and initially there was a lot of public fear. However, shortly thereafter, the Internet was abuzz with rumors that this wasn't a missile at all, but rather the contrail of a incoming flight from Hawaii, either a United Airlines flight or a U.S. Airways flight. Time has passed. The FAA can easily tell us precisely which flight it was. The FAA has remained silent. The Pentagon, which initially took an interest immediately stating this wasn't a national security threat, has remained silent. No one has told us what flight it was. Well, one reason they might not want to do that would be if they identified the flight, it might be quite easy, or would be quite easy, to go back to the flight path and find out exactly where the airplane was when the contrail appeared. We can't do that because the FAA won't confirm the flights. So where are we now? And that's what Jim Marrs has been thinking about and doing some research about. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Hey, Whitley. Always good to be with you. And it always is important for people to start thinking for themselves and look behind the headlines. So let's take this step at a time. First off, the CBS helicopter films what appears to be a trail from a missile. The cameraman, the newsman, that day said it was definitely a missile. I zoomed in with my telephoto lens, and there was a silvery metal object at the top, and there was flames coming out the bottom, and it was spinning. And but then, about 2 days later, he retracts his story and says, "Oh no, I don't know. I guess I was mistaken." All right, can the government make people change their stories? Absolutely. I've talked to hundreds of people in Dealey Plaza at the time of the Kennedy assassination, and they said initially they thought the shots came from the grassy knoll. But later, I said, well, where do you think they came from now? And they said, well, they came from the book depository. I said, why do you think so? Because the government said that's where they came from. So he changes his story. Then, of course, initially the U.S. military, apparently caught off guard, says, well, no, we weren't launching any missiles, so it couldn't have been ours. And then a day or two later, all of a sudden, they're coming back going, oh, well, it was just a contrail. But, Whitley, as you pointed out, they failed to tell us exactly what airplane it was so we can find out exactly what it was. Now, balancing that, we have Brigadier General Jim Cash, an Air Force general, who in a blog says during the late 80s I was assigned to NORAD as a command director initially and later as assistant director of operations for NORAD inside Cheyenne Mountain Complex. And he was leading missile launches. They had all these sensors, and he was intimately involved with missile launches. He also flew U.S. Air Force fighters to include the F-106, F-4, F-15, F-16, and commanded an F-15 squadron and F-16 wing. And he says, quote, in my opinion, there's no doubt that what was captured on video off the coast of California was a missile launch. It was clearly observed by NORAD, assessed by a four-star general in minutes, and passed to the president immediately. The system works, and heads fall that way if there's any failure. This is one of the most important tenets of national defense and the sole purpose to protect the American people. Even the smallest failure in this system gets intense scrutiny at the highest level. So what he's saying is basically that a decision to put out some lame excuses, he calls it, would not come from the military, but would come from the president himself. All right, now we're finally on another, in Veterans Today, in an article by its senior editor, Gordon Duff, he quotes a retired U.S. Navy fire control technician who is certified in missile systems. He worked with the Navy's Harpoon, Tomahawk, and ASROC missile systems. And he saw the video, and he said, first, I know it's a large missile because it did not exhibit the typical corkscrewing trajectory of a beam-riding missile as it tries to acquire the targeting beam. This tells me it's a big boy with a complete guidance system installed in it, which we called a fire-and-forget missile, because once it's launched, its internal guidance system takes over, and there's no real need for external control. And I'm fairly confident it is not one of ours, says this Navy fire control technician. As the vapor trail appears dirty, it looks brownish. I've personally been involved in these launches, and he said basically the U.S. missiles burn very clean, whitish blue, not dirty, brackish brown. The missile had rather crude fuel cells, which tells me this is not one of ours. And lastly, but not leastly, one of my personal old friends and high school buddies was a missile launch officer for the Air Force. And I talked to him about this, and he said, there's no question about it, this was a missile launch. So they're lying to us. They're lying to us. But, hey, would the U.S. government and the Pentagon, the president, lie to us? Well,
no, boy, there was a time, Jim, when I would have been deeply offended to hear you saying that. But since I've had the Close Encounter of the Third Kind in 1985, I've seen that the U.S. government is actually just a tissue of lies. Of course they lie to us about everything.
Exactly. Would they lie to us? Only continually. They lied to us about, light at the end of the tunnel in Vietnam. They've lied to us about 9/11. They've lied to us about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They've lied to us about they're still hunting for Osama bin Laden, although they know he's been dead almost 10 years. I mean, is it just lie upon lie upon lie? And the thing is, people are catching on to that. And this is what this General Cash also said. He said it's very counterproductive. Said people are their confidence in the government is eroding, and when they tell us cheap lies like this that are easily seen through by anybody with any sense, then this is self-destructive. But now, so what's going on? What would this be about? Well, according to the Russians, they said their satellites picked it up. It was a launch from a Chinese submarine, and it was an ICBM type missile. And I've been doing my homework, and I do find under some military sites that the Chinese have now developed the JL-2 submarine-launched ballistic missile, and it is deployed on their class JIN submarines, has a range of 7,200 kilometers, and since this was launched 35 miles off the coast of Los Angeles, that means, let's see, probably everybody in the United States is vulnerable.
Well, the missile it would have landed in either northern China or Siberia if it
right, because it was on a northwest trajectory.
But it was like a shot fired across our bows then. Exactly.
This was a little, as one wag put it, this was China groping in the United States. This JL-2 missile, by the way, 2 years ago in a report from the Pentagon entitled Military Power of the People's Republic of China. This was a report issued by the Pentagon. It said that this type of missile gives China its first credible sea-based nuclear strike capability. Now, why off the coast of the United States? Why fire this shot across our bow? And why on November the 8th? Well, let's look at what was happening right there. We've got President Obama is over in Asia.
Okay, Jim, we're going to look at that all right, but we're going to look at that in a couple of seconds because we've got to take this time for a brief break in the There are going to be some commercials in the free section of Dreamland. In the subscriber area, we'll be getting back to Jim's conversation with Jim in just an instant. And for subscribers, there is an interesting interview with Darren. Darren is a contactee. He has been interviewed by Ann Strieber before. I interviewed him this time because it has something to do with the night of November the 8th. Darren and his wife have seen and successfully documented quite a number of UFOs in Orange County, and something happened to them late that night that is quite unforgettable. And we don't know whether it's related or not, but listen to what Darren has to say about it. It's very, very strange stuff. We'll be right back. We're back with Jim Marrs. We're talking about this apparent missile launch that happened on November the 8th that has been dismissed, and probably not correctly or truthfully, as a contrail of a jet. The FAA never said which flight it was. Because they never said which flight it was, it's not possible to analyze the route and tell whether or not the flight was coming in at the time the contrail was videotaped by the news helicopter. So we're left in the dark, as always. But Jim, you're quite certain now that it's a missile, as you were saying, just as we left the air. But why don't we just pick it up from there?
Right. Well, I do recall early on seeing the complete videotape, and to me it was clearly a missile because you could obviously see the fire coming out of the end of the object at the top of the trail. But yet, within a couple of days, the only pictures I could find, either on YouTube or maybe I was not looking in the right place, but it was edited versions or still photographs, which did not show the tip of the thing, which again is misleading because then that allows you to argue that it was some sort of optical illusion. It was actually a plane flight coming in, east to west, and just kind of gave the impression that it was going up in the air. I'm sorry, maybe I'm just becoming too cynical. But we're left with the question of why would they do this? Why would China launch a missile, ICBM-type large missile, off so close to our coast? And it was hitting in a northwest trajectory, which means it would have landed in China, or perhaps up in the even further north.
In Siberia.
Siberia, yeah. And why would they do this? Well, let's look at what was going on. President Obama was going to the Far East for a G20 summit in Seoul, Korea, and for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Tokyo also. And we're in a economic dance of death with China because they make everything. And if the U.S. dollar goes down, or if the U.S. quits buying goods from China, then the Walmart shelves go empty, and everybody's hurting. And the idea is this was a flexing of China's muscle to show that they are no longer going to be pushed around by the economy of the United States.
Right.
Russia and China both now have announced that they are not going to be trading in dollars anymore. And China just recently, and at about that same time, about right there in early November, downgraded the American dollar trading dollar from AA to A minus.
Yeah, they downgraded our credit from AA to A minus. That's
so
correct.
They're downgrading,
and at the same time announced that they would be trading with Russia in local currencies rather than in dollars.
Exactly. Now, of course, the thing that has propped up the U.S. dollar for decades now has been nothing but our military strength and nuclear weapons. So I think this may have been an attempt to show, hey, we can do this too. Also, Whitley, if you'll remember back a few months ago, maybe in September, somewhere in there there were U.S. naval exercises in the South China Sea, and we were firing off missiles, and we were basically saying, look, we're still the superpower in the world. Keep accepting our dollars. I think this may have been a response saying, hey, we're a superpower too, and we have the same capability as you. Now, all this sounds like Cold War one-upmanship, and that's fairly normal. What is not normal, and what bothers the heck out of me, and I think would bother you too, Whitley, and I think should bother all of your listeners, is that we're being lied to by our own government. We're paying money. We're paying trillions of dollars in tax dollars, and it's all just being siphoned out of this country. It's going for wars that are unending. Remember, everybody voted for Obama because he was going to be the peace candidate. He was going to get us out of Iraq. And yet he finally, when he gets in 2009, he tells us, well, it'll be 2010 before we get out. We'll be out by August 2010. Well, August came, and now it's going to be 2011. And now they've just announced it's going to be 2014. We're never getting out of there. And our country's unraveling economically, and we're squandering all this money, and then they lie to us. And what's even worse is China now has claimed that they've shot down one of our most advanced fighter planes, the F-22 Raptor.
And an Now, China actually claimed they shot it down?
Yes, there's a U-2 of them. They're showing the wreckage, showing a pilot parachuting out. And when I first heard this, I thought, oh yeah, okay, sure. This.
But China actually officially claimed the shoot down. I don't think they did, Jim.
Not officially, perhaps.
No, not officially.
But they are claiming that they shot it down, and there are pictures of the wreckage in a Chinese setting. And hey, like you, I was highly. I was very incredulous.
But there was one that crashed just recently.
November 17th, according to mainstream media, the base at the Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Alaska said one of their F-22s was missing. And so it makes you wonder. And then a few days later, they said, well, they think maybe that they found the wreckage, but they haven't found the pilot. If they haven't found the pilot, how do we know the wreckage is legitimate? See, and this is leading to a credibility gap. If you can't trust your own government, if you can't trust your own military, who can you trust? As Gordon Duff, senior editor for Veterans Today magazine, says, a submarine approaches America's heavily guarded coast through a network of defenses costing billions, launches an ICBM capable of carrying up to 10 hydrogen bombs, launches the missile 2 minutes from Los Angeles, and we're utterly unaware. And this is the same military we trust our children's lives to. And
bear in mind that submarine defense net has been downgraded continuously for 25 years. There's very little left out there. There's almost
true. I think there's like two ships left with this submarine searching capability there, where there used to be dozens. But also, keep in mind, how many trillions of dollars have we spent since the 1980s on what is just commonly known as the Star Wars ballistic missile defense system? And if they can slip up and fire off a missile, 35 miles off the coast of Los Angeles, then where'd all that money go? Are we? Obviously, that was a waste. It's just calls the whole system into question, and I think we should start questioning it, because obviously what we're being told is just propaganda pablum.
And it's quite different from the Cold War, if this is all true. And I have to say, I am not an expert, but so far, every expert I've talked to has said it was indeed an ICBM Contrail, right, as you have found. And the diplomatic and economic maneuvers that took place around that period were sort of odd as well. And as you've pointed out, So maybe that's exactly what it was. Maybe it was. But what if, and might it not have been one of ours? An accidental launch? They would certainly have a motive for keeping that secret.
Well, yes, but again, the experts, and like you, I don't claim to be an expert, but I do know that the video I saw, in my mind, tallies with what the Navy technician said, which is it seemed to have a dirty brownish trail, which is not at all what we see with the missiles that I've seen launched and the films I've seen. And I think that there would have been a more immediate and a more credible cover story to the whole thing if it had been some sort of inadvertent launch by the U.S. I think this is exactly what and of course the problem is we've been conditioned not to trust the Russians, not to trust the Chinese. And you and I, Whitley, and probably most of the people listening, we grew up in the old republic in which the Russians had propaganda, the Chinese had propaganda, but the United States, we told the truth, and that's what we're conditioned to. But unfortunately, we're into just a whole new world here, and it's like perhaps they're telling the truth, perhaps we're not, because as we mentioned earlier, the track record for truthfulness for the U.S. government, the military in particular, is just not very good.
Not very good at all anymore. I think to myself, of what would have happened during the Cold War if this had occurred then, it would have been immediate national news. There's no question about it. It
Right.
wouldn't have been hidden like this.
No.
And, you have to wonder, the possibility exists, I think, that maybe it was a Chinese launch, but it was an accident on their part. That would also give us a motive for hiding it. I just don't see the motive for hiding it except, bureaucratic stupidity and the habit that the United States government has gotten into of lying to us about so many things. I just wonder if if the story is as ominous as it seems.
Well, exactly, because, when you take the possible shoot down of one of our F-22s and the fact that they fired a missile launch, if indeed that's exactly what, and if it was intentional. I mean, what we're talking here is that we're practically in a shooting war with China, and we're not being told about it. It's being covered up. That would be like, I don't know, Hitler attacking Poland, and
the Poles not mentioning it to their people.
Say, well, yeah, we're not going to tell you about that. Well, they had some sort of a freakish accident with tanks over in Western Poland today. It's amazing. I don't get it.
It's very strange.
But back to your question, though.
Yeah, please.
Why would they cover this up? Again, I think the main thing, it comes back to the economy. The economy's fragile. I think it's in a lot worse shape than we're being told. When my experience as a newsman over the years and talking to economists is that they feel a very definite responsibility in speaking out publicly, and what I found is what they'll tell you privately and what they say for public consumption is sometimes two entirely different things. And there's a reason for that, because if economists, especially ones with large followings and that have have the microphone to a large segment of the population, if they say things are getting bad, well, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. People then hoard their money and they won't buy stocks and bonds, and it's exactly what they're prophesying. So what I found traditionally is that no matter what they may say privately, publicly, they're always upbeat, and optimistic. Well, things are looking up. And but now there are just a huge list of top economists who are saying the bottom's falling out. And so when they say that, we're in dangerous waters. And for then, on top of that, if they acknowledge that China is flexing its muscle and becoming the world's real superpower, that just, there goes more credibility and there goes more confidence, and we got a real problem there. Now, that coupled with the idea, again, that the biggest bulk of the U.S. budget for years has gone to defense, and we have spent trillions of dollars on this missile defense systems. and they're asking for more and more now. In fact, that's one sneaky thing here. Perhaps this is some sort of false flag thing pulled off by our own military to try to get their budgets increased and maintained at those levels. But they've pulled that for so long. I find it hard to believe that they would go to that extent. But I think the main thing is that they just don't want to acknowledge that all of these billions of dollars, tax dollars, that could have gone for education, for helping people, for building up the infrastructure in this country, has just been wasted.
Yeah, well, that would seem to be a pretty good motive, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the economy and the situation that it's in and where we're going and how that relates to this possible belligerent relationship, secret belligerent relationship with China when we get back. We'll be right back. We're talking today to Jim Marrs about this bizarre event that happened on November the 8th, an apparent missile launch off the coast of Los Angeles that was dismissed unofficially as an airplane contrail of an incoming flight from Hawaii. There was never any official denial of that, however. The official world remained silent on what it was and hoped the story, I suppose, would just sort of fade away. Subsequently, an F-22 was lost somewhere in the Arctic. There's a certain amount of evidence that the crash of the F-22 took place in China, but that's not clear either. We have the possibility of some kind of belligerent atmosphere between the United States and China. Now, a few days ago, right before exercises in the South China Sea between South Korea and the U.S. Navy occurred, the North Koreans became obstreperous and shelled South Korea very briefly. So there's a real sense of unease. The United States, prior to any of these things, the Federal Reserve printed $600 billion in money. They just printed the money. They essentially created it. They did this in an effort to cause the dollar's value to drop in order, since the Chinese would not reduce the value of their own currency, the yuan, they tried to arbitrarily, from our viewpoint, our standpoint, reduce the value of the dollar, thus making Chinese goods more expensive in the United States and our goods less expensive, so that American workers can go back to work making things instead of having us buy everything from China. The Chinese were very, very angry about this, and the reason is China has no net. It has billions of workers. There is no social welfare system whatsoever. If they stop getting a paycheck, they immediately go hungry, immediately, and they take to the streets. It happened in 2008 all over China. These people are ready. China's a powder keg, basically. And if this prosperity that they have, this bubble that they're living in, is interrupted, that government is going to collapse. It's as simple as that, and they know it perfectly well. And that, I think, is a very powerful motivation. Interestingly enough, what happened after the $600 billion attempt to cool down the American currency is the euro began to fall apart, and the dollar is stronger than ever. The Chinese needn't have worried. So here we are, with our currency so strong that foreign goods cost much less. It costs $2,000 or $3,000 less right now to buy a Mercedes-Benz than it did 6 months ago, simply because of changes in currency. Meanwhile, the price of a Cadillac is exactly the same. So let's get back to Jim now.
Well, Whitley also wouldn't, am I correct in thinking that with us printing all this money and devaluing the dollar at a time when Obama is in Asia trying to get China to loan us more money So in other words, we're trying to ask them to loan us more money for the devalued dollar. Wouldn't that also anger them?
Well, yeah, I don't get, I'm not absolutely sure that the tail and the dog were even connected to the same rump when Obama was in China, was in Asia, because they weren't playing with a full deck. You can't go to the Chinese and say, loan us more money, while at the same time you're making the value of the money of our money less.
Right.
But what they didn't understand, what the U.S. Federal Reserve didn't understand, was this was just a drop in the ocean. The dollar, the strength of the dollar is really at this point almost unassailable because of the unrest in the rest of the world. And now
particularly in the European Union, which,
right.
which seems to be coming apart at the seams because the people in France and Germany and some of the strong economies, probably correctly, are really chafing in the fact that they're having to bail out Ireland and Italy and some of these other places, Greece,
Portugal,
and Portugal. Why should we be bailing them out? And of course, we should be as upset as they are.
But we are bailing them out.
What are we doing bailing out all these other people?
We are bailing them out. The one thing that they never say in the press is where the money in the International Monetary Fund comes from. It comes from us.
Exactly.
So, when you say when the EU is bailing out Ireland with the help of the IMF, translation, the EU is bailing out Ireland with the help of the American people.
Yeah, U.S. taxpayers.
That's right. It comes right out of our pockets.
Exactly. And when Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, is asked by Congress, these credit swaps that we're sending over to these foreign banks, and he's asked, how much money do they get, which banks they go to, and what are they putting up as collateral? He tells the U.S. Congress, he thumbs his nose at us. He said, the Federal Reserve System is a private banking system. I don't have to tell you that.
That's right.
They won't even tell us where our money's going. This in a kinder, gentler age, in the days of the old republic, people would be up in arms. But I guess in today's zombified America, they just keep watching TV, and just keep partying.
I think it's possible that the Chinese government might become incredibly belligerent if they felt that we were trying to force the issue with their currency. And I do think it's possible that they might have resorted to a military warning. And if so, then the Chinese government is as inadequate as an institution as it looks from the outside, because that's a very, very dangerous and foolish thing to do on the one hand. On the other hand, because the Americans kept it secret, that puts all the cards in the hands of China.
Exactly.
They won. That means that we will not see any further attempts on the part of the United States, would be my guess, to reduce the value to increase the value, of the yuan, meaning that we're going to stay jobless over here. And, it's unfortunate because there isn't enough work in the world for everybody right now. And we need some of that work to come home. The only way to do that is to reduce the value of the dollar. That way, things from abroad get more expensive. And people buy homemade stuff.
But of course, that's you're basing this, I presume, on the assumption that the true rulers of the United States, and I'm not talking about the bought up minions in Congress and the media. I'm talking about the true rulers, that they really want the United States to be successful and vibrant, and and I'm not sure that's the case. I think they are trying.
It's not clear, is it?
It
seems to me that the whole thrust of the way the economy has been working for the past really 25 years has been to make the average American more and more helpless and more dependent on the next paycheck.
Right. The whole idea is to bring about their new world order, which is to drag the United States standard of living down to a minimal level so that it blends with the rest of the world. But Whitley, look at this as just backing off and looking at the broadest picture. Would you agree with me the United States of America still is very, very rich country in resources?
Oh, it is a rich country in resources.
Okay, and we have a reasonably literate workforce that really wants to work, right?
A very good workforce, an excellent workforce.
That's right. Good workforce, lots of raw materials and lots of resources. Therefore, why is it that we're in such bad economic straits? And I submit to you there's only one reason. Because somebody wants it that way.
Well, that would be why American companies have been given tax breaks for years to send jobs abroad.
Exactly.
And why they have been allowed to do that. The Germans didn't allow it. And the result right now is the German economy, the German fisc is not in debt. The German economy is healthier than the United States economy. People are working because they still have a manufacturing base. My God, when you drive through the Midwest from city to city, as I have done, you see the results of all of that work being sent abroad. And, I know somebody who works in a call center right now in this country who lives in fear because the call center it could be shipped to India at any time,
right,
or the Philippines, or any number of other countries to save a little money. And does that mean that the American worker has to work for less in order to be competitive? Does it mean that we have to give up being a first world country in order to get jobs? Or is our choice have slave labor wage jobs and live like a third world country, or live with no jobs at all? I'm afraid that might be the choice that they are giving us. There is a third possibility, though, and that is what is not being done. We should be spending, if we're going to spend a lot of federal money, let's spend it on innovation, on finding new ways to do things. Instead, for example, of screaming and yelling that there is no such thing as global warming, let's innovate and make jobs innovating.
Right.
So that if that is true, then we're prepared for it. There's so much we could do that we do not do. It's just a shame, all of it.
That's right. And why is it that way? And again, I submit to you, because somewhere somebody wants it that way. You don't want it that way, I don't want it that way, and I don't think anybody listening to this program wants it that way. So why is it that way? Because somebody wants it that way.
Well,
and we need to find out who those people are, and we need to start exercising our power as a free people, because there's more of us than there are of them, and it's time to take back control of this country.
Well, Jim, thank you very much as always.
Thank you. That was good. Give them something to think about anyway.
Well, that's true, and I guess we won't be talking until after the new year. You can listen to Jim Marrs again on our year-end program. He'll be there talking about what work he's doing now and what he expects to happen in the coming year. So this is Whitley Strieber. It's
Kennedy assassination, and they said initially they thought the shots came from the grassy knoll, but later I said, well, where do you think they came from now? And they said, well, they came from the book depository. I said, why do you think so? Because the government said that's where they came from. So he changes his story. Then, of course, initially the U.S. military, apparently caught off guard, says, well, no, we weren't launching any missiles, so it couldn't have been ours. And then a day or two later, all of a sudden they're coming back going, oh, well, it was just a contrail. But Whitley, as you pointed out, they failed to tell us exactly what airplane it was, so we can find out exactly what it was. Now, balancing that, we have Brigadier General Jim Cash, an Air Force general, who in a blog says during the late 80s I was assigned to NORAD as a command director.
U.S. Airways flight. Time has passed. The FAA can easily tell us precisely which flight it was. The FAA has remained silent. The Pentagon, which initially took an interest immediately stating this wasn't a national security threat, has remained silent. No one has told us what flight it was. Well, one reason they might not want to do that would be if they identified the flight, it might be quite easy, or would be quite easy, to go back to the flight path and find out exactly where the airplane was when the contrail appeared. We can't do that because the FAA won't confirm the flights. So where are we now? And that's what Jim Mars has been thinking about and doing some research about. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Hey, Whitley.
Well, the redoubtable and always prepared Jim Mars is with us today to talk about something that came and went in the news all too quickly a couple of weeks ago. On November the 8th, a CBS News helicopter from Los Angeles videotaped a contrail that immediately became world famous because it appeared to be the contrail of a missile rising up about 35 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. Extraordinarily dangerous event, to say the least, and initially there was a lot of public fear. However, shortly thereafter, the Internet was abuzz with rumors that this wasn't a missile at all, but rather the contrail of a incoming flight from Hawaii, either a United Airlines flight or a...
Always good to be with you. And it always is important for people to start thinking for themselves and look behind the headlines. So let's take this step at a time. First off, the CBS helicopter films what appears to be a trail from a missile. The cameraman, the newsman, that day said it was definitely a missile. I zoomed in with my telephoto lens, and there was a silvery metal object at the top, and there was flames coming out the bottom, and it was spinning. And but then, about 2 days later, he retracts his story and says, "Oh no, I don't know. I guess I was mistaken." All right, can the government make people change their stories? Absolutely. I've talked to hundreds of people in Dealey Plaza at the time of the tour initially, and later as assistant director of operations for NORAD inside Cheyenne Mountain Complex. And he was leading missile launches. They had all these sensors, and he was intimately involved with missile launches. He also flew U.S. Air Force fighters, to include the F-106, F-4, F-15, F-16, and commanded an F-15 squadron and F-16 wing. And he says, quote, "In my opinion, there's no doubt that what was captured on video off the coast of California was a missile launch. It was clearly observed by NORAD, assessed by a four-star general in minutes, and passed to the president immediately. The system works, and heads fall that way if there's any failure. This is one of the most important tenets of national defense and the sole purpose of protecting the American people. Even as